Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm so pleased to welcome Joe Millar and Kwame Dawes here for a reading of from Joe's latest book, new and collected poems called Dark Harvest. I'll do some quick bios in a moment, but just first, my name is Scott Cord. For those of you new to this arena, I'm the director of the Pacific University MFA in Writing program, where both Mr. Millar and Mr. Dawes are on the faculty in poetry. And I think that's largely what brings us all together tonight, is this really wonderful community of people who are, as we were just saying in the green room, looking forward to coming to residency in January. So those of you out there from Pacific, welcome. And those of you who are guests, welcome. We will get started. Joseph Millar is the author of Overtime, Fortune, Blue Rust, and Kingdom. His work has won fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and a Pushcart Prize. His conversation partner today is Kwame Dawes, the author of over 20 books of poetry and numerous other books of fiction, criticism, and essays. He's the Glenn Lushai editor of Prairie Schooner and teaches at the University of Nebraska, as well as our Pacific MFA. He's the director of the African Poetry Book Fund, artistic director of the Calabash International Literary Festival, and editor of American Life in Poetry. Our evening tonight is going to be a reading from Joe from the new collection, after perhaps a few opening remarks from them both. And then Kwame will lead a conversation through some questions for Joe, and then we will save the rest of the time for Q&A from you. So in the meantime, have those questions percolating, and I will turn this over to Joe and Kwame, and I'll see you all later. Thanks both.
So should I just start reading poems, do you think?
I think so, Joe. I think that's a good way to start. First of all, I'm glad we're able to do this together. You know, above all, it's a friendship thing. So, but I'm looking forward to hearing you read these poems first.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dawes. Of course, I appreciate you as well. Appreciate you doing this, and I certainly appreciate our friendship. I brought out a couple of copies of the African poets that you and Chris have featured, and they're so amazing. These young poets that you've given an avenue to publish, and I just admire that so much. I know what it means to finally have some of one's work in a book.
That's right.
Be able to give it to somebody instead of handing them pieces of paper, you know, to have a book, it just is, could be everything for a beginning poet or a more advanced poet. Have everything in one place. It's terrific.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, you know, in 7 years, we've done almost 100 of these young poets in Africa. So it's a huge deal.
Yeah, it is. This is from a recent.
Yeah, that's the most recent box. Yeah.
That's the one that you talked about at the Schomburg.
Yeah.
So I was able to score this collection, and yeah, I just shout out. Go get them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read some poems from this book, which is my new and selected, which you guys are about to be subject to some poems from. And I have a poem in here that I wrote during my courtship with my wife, and it's about the kind of it's called Poem for a New Girlfriend, and it's about the fragility of a new relationship. And I have a young friend. He's not that young. He's younger than me, but you know, he's not that young. But he's married to the same woman 35 or 37 years, and she passed away in a year or two ago. And so he's dating somebody, And he has all these questions about how to do it in such a way as to not freak her out. And so he's been calling me up. We're like talking like high school kids about romance, but this poem, which is not new, it brought back that whole period of time when me and Annie were going out, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And of course, you want to know what's going to happen, but you don't know what's going to happen. Poem for a new girlfriend. I'm driving down the highway in the dark on my way to pick you up, with the ocean on one side and raindrops spattering the windshield, balancing a Coke between my legs. If a baby were asleep in the front seat, nothing would wake it. Not the hiss of the long grass waving by the seawall, not the cypress branches groaning in the wind, or the dim necklaces of surf tumbling onto the sand. I'm afraid to do anything sudden on this wet pavement, afraid to change direction or speed up, to give you the small bracelet I bought today in the Castro, or to say anything about the future, as though the car might slide sideways or the doors fly open. So the baby would go on sleeping, a pale shadow beside me, stirring slightly perhaps, its hands like stars in the glow from the dash. Impossible to tell what snow-lit oceans might be swaying under its eyelids, with no cars on the road and the lights out front, all turning green in the rain. So, as you can imagine, these poems have been around, some of them, for a while, since I've been writing, pretty much. And I have a couple poems about Hansel and Gretel's father, because that's a figure that's always compelled me. And some of you may have heard my intro to the Hansel and Gretel poems, which is that when I was a kid, I was always terrified by this fairy tale. I was terrified by it. And I just thought, the kids wake up in the night and they hear their parents talking about how they're going to get rid of them. And I just thought, how could their parents, how could they do that? And then, I had some kids of my own and I saw how they could do that. And as because of the sort of holographic nature of a fairy tale, it can be seen from so many different angles. So I wrote an early poem called Hansel and Gretel's Father. And then this one is called Hansel and Gretel's Father Explains. Children, I chose the woman because her skirts, and the thing of it is after Hansel and Gretel, they get out of it. They don't, the witch doesn't get them because, Gretel, thanks to Gretel, but she pushes the witch in the furnace, right? And that's the end of the witch. But then they go back to their dad and they forgive him. And so I was like, how could they forgive him? And my wife said, well, they're kids. They kind of have to forgive him because he's their dad and that's where they live. And, that was always a note of reality that, so anyways, Hansel and Gretel's Father Explains. Children, I chose the woman because her skirts rustled when she undressed and because she'd bring my lunch to the woods and sit close on a fallen log, one hand on my leg, watching me eat. In winter, the flowers her body smelled of helped me forget the wind, sharpening itself like an axe blade over the frozen lake. God help me, I wanted to sleep forever, curled up at her narrow breast. How many times I've followed the path we took that last day through the trees, the ravens' iron voices mocking my flesh. I dreamed I saw a boy's blonde hair matted with blood, the burned face of a woman 7 feet tall, my crimes, the damp sperm blossoms under her dress. And maybe I've only dreamed this: spring rain in the forest, new grass in the fields, your hands holding mine in the uneasy clasp, restless, hesitant, partially feigned, of childhood's helpless forgiveness. So that's Hansel and Gretel's father. You know, that poor guy. You know, I don't want, I mean, probably you guys have heard a lot of these from those of you who have labored through your curriculum at Pacific over the years. Here's a poem I wrote for my brother, and I dedicated this collection to him. And at Christmas time, excuse me, at Christmas time, one year we went around visiting the old folks' homes. My brother got me to do it with him and with some other people from our church, and we sang Christmas carols to the old people. And this one is called Caroling. We clutched the purple mimeos of joy to the world and God rest ye merry as we sang a cappella, a bit out of time, next to the fly speckled angel in the La Honda home for the aged. The patients sat up straight in their PJs under the fragrant pine boughs, wheezed, giggled, clapped, and waved. And my brother walked out among them, bending down in his white shirt to listen, nodding, giving away the tissue-wrapped navel oranges. Later, he'd lead me to 2 old men lying in neighborhood beds, rough faces deepened by weather, big hands fleshy and scarred. Clarence and Dale from North Dakota, brothers who'd followed the wheat harvest, picked apples together in Washington State. Sometimes they need extra oxygen, and both of them suffer bad knees and feet, smiling broadly without many teeth after 91 Christmases. Don't ask me why I've waited here, locked up inside the hours and years, or why I keep turning away. Don't ask me why I wake up so early and stand on the bridge before work, watching red leaves drift into the river and thinking nothing will last. So, you know, I haven't exactly figured out a complete orderly reading, but here's one that I sort of like, called Urban Coyote. It's a dietary poem, Mr. Dawes. It's dietary, you know. In the green dream, Urban Coyote, in the green dream of spring, I stretch myself out, letting the gray mist hide me, shoving my nose in the garbage pile, chewing eggshells and cheese rinds. I swallow cellophane, I swallow cat hair, butcher paper stained dark with fish blood, and run grinning through the blousy woods, smelling the riverbank's plasma. I smell the barns in the city dump, the quail asleep in the tall grass. In the morning, the doctors send over my lab results, triglycerides and cholesterol, glucose and prostate antigen, diets of cold fruit, nuts, and water. I sign the mortgage papers. I read the bank statement. I pay the gas bill. I sweep the floor. And then in the marshy, glycemic night, I lick back the plush fur covering my lips. I steal whatever can fit in my mouth under the fat April moon. You know, dietary poem. Right. Let's see what else you guys might like. Here's a poem called Time Poem. It's about this horse that used to have at Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. He was a wonderful horse. Time Poem. And it was, it's a place we used to go, and have residency and write poems. No one will tell me where the horses have gone. Yeah, we went back one year, the horses were gone. The last time I went there. No one will tell me where the horses have gone, who rested under the oak trees, especially the black one with mottled lips, who had hummed to himself when I stroked his chest fur, nicked up by barbed wire and covered with flies, beneath which his huge and sleepless heart carried him into the summer. His ghost now grazing the roadside, this night before the Florida Derby. The pastures a canebrake of ancient kudzu, laid down and braided with rusted fence. The road, a wide strip of moonlit ashes, leading away from the barn, where my friend makes his sculptures of clay and branched iron, unchanged by wind and time. Though Jupiter hangs low overhead, like us, unable to escape the hours. It's 2 a.m. on the coast of the moon, but here it's just midnight, and the sleepers open their arms to the sound of 5,000 horses driving the big train south from Monroe, dragging along cars mile after mile, its engineer like an aging king, watching the clock, one hand on the throttle, the howl of the whistle under the stars, trapped and burning. Yeah. This is a poem I wrote for you, Mr. Dawes, called The Poetry Body. The youngest won't fall asleep, though he keeps resting his head on the table next to his empty plate. These are the jewels of his half-open eyes, bewitched by the pale, blossoming spines of the centerpiece flowers no one remembers the names of. These are the sparks flying up from the fire and the night pressing in on the windows. I know by now the harsh stillness of a winter night by the beach, the moon half hidden, low and dim. And sometimes I think poetry has failed me. The night's gone by and chances missed, all breathing deeply beside me. A fluttering of feathers, you called it, this soft body that consumes everything, especially our failures, carrying something under its tongue it is not going to show to anyone. Yes, that was the poetry body. That was such a wonderful talk you gave. Let's see, how are we doing here? Maybe 1 or 2 more, eh? 1 or 2?
Yeah, 2 would be great.
2?
Yeah.
Why women live longer. You can hear 2 thin minor chords through the wall and the song in a broken falsetto as you lie on the couch, half out of your body, unable to feel your feet. Dead leaves blowing off the tin roof just ahead of the rain. Then something about a coal mine, something about a train. You don't like her to see you like this, though she knows you well. Your socks fallen down and the rough hair all worn away from your shins, which are shiny now, like an old man's, which is what you're becoming this afternoon, listening to faint music, watching the shadows drift down the gray ceiling, stained like a liver x-ray. She comes in the house with her girlfriend. They soldier along through the desert of time. They rub lotion into their aging calves. Speaking of shoes, speaking of hair, the tea roses climb in the mailbox. If you could, you would visit your father's ashes, long since scattered on Lighthouse Beach. No matter the feeling of rootlessness, of night coming on and the early stars, almost out of reach. So let me see if I can find one to end on that is good. Yeah, you like that, if it's good. This poem is called Night. Nobody wants to fall asleep, watching the stars burn like trash fires, listening to the big waves smoke down the rocks. Nobody wants to sleep. My Pelican 800 fountain pen, green with a faint gold stripe, lost with my 100-proof memory, my sea flat as glass, its kelp leaves and poppies. Now I'll watch the women dressed in black, black shoes, black pants, long hair falling over their hands and wrists. They stay awake far into the night, writing their scattered poems. Sisters of the half-empty wine jar, of childhood lost in the coastal fog and the lapsed Catholic funeral flowers. Nobody thinks of going to sleep now that the streetcars are silent, now that the dew seeps into the grass. I came west in my 20s looking for work, driving straight into the setting sun. And now I'll take anything, a pencil stub and a cheap cardboard notebook somebody gave me for nothing.
Nice, Joe. It's nice. So, Joe, I do have I have a lot of questions. I call them questions. These are stuff that we would talk about over fish breakfast. But I want to take advantage of this chance to talk to you and to have you talk a little bit about this. This is a fantastic book. But it's a new and selected. It's your first new and selected, and therefore it's a reflective moment, right? We are gathering the works from 2001, 4 volumes, and then the new work. And so my suspicion is that it's giving, I'm curious about how you put this together. How you made, what choices were made, who made those choices, what conversations you had about them, and where you sit now looking back, because there is a way in which you're looking back and then looking forward. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about what it feels like in this moment, what things you've been thinking about your work, about what you've given to us, and how you engage it and think about how this process of putting this book together has affected you.
Well, that, I got the idea to do it when they announced in early March or February of 2020 that we were in a pandemic, and you know, you had to wipe down your groceries before you brought them in the house and
That's right.
so on. And we were staying in this high rise back in Raleigh for the spring semester, you know, teaching back there. And I thought, well, this will be a good project. If my editor will do it, I'll ask him if he'll do it. And he said, yeah, he would do it. And so I got somebody to type everything for me because I'm not a good typist. So I picked out a selection.
Right.
And it was, you know, it even went back into kind of juvenilia poems. I didn't know what to do. So I had this huge kind of unruly mass of work. And I got it all together and I looked at it and I selected out pretty good, I thought, but it was still unwieldy and very unwieldy, and it didn't flow very well.
Mm.
And then my editor says, oh yeah, and look, by the way, you can't go over 130 pages. You know what I mean? So I was just like, you know, fuck, you know, 130 pages. So, but you know, he was stubborn about it. And then, you know, and then I realized he didn't want me to put all my best poems in there because then they wouldn't buy any of the other books. You know, like so that was probably part of his solution. So Dorian said, well, why don't you get young Mike McGriff to help you?
Mm.
He knows your work and he's had editorial experience and he's worked as a translator. He has, and he knows what, he had this little press, Tavern Books, that he was partners in. And so he's got a, so I said, okay, good idea. So I sent everything over to Mike.
Mm.
And he put this book together for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Basically, he did it.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of poems in here that are much quieter than the poems I would have chosen.
Right.
But it read more quietly and more just more, I don't know, it read more like a volume, you know, like it was unbroken and kind of in the way it went from the beginning of it to the end of it. It was much less jagged and bumpy than the version that I would have chosen. And also, and actually I sent it to him before the editors told me, yeah, I can only have 130 pages. So then the editor tells me this, and I call Mike and I just say, screw it, let's not do it. He told me I can only have 130 pages. I can't. But Mike was good. He said, that's okay, lean and mean, we'll do it. You know, it'll be good. You know, blah, blah, we can do this. And he named some other kind of collections that were not that, didn't have that many pages.
Yeah, there's some classic models.
Yeah, there were some, you know, and Simic had a book that had 60 poems in it or something. Yeah. And then, you know, they were just like, he said, you know, why don't you, you know, think of it like that? And he said, never mind, I'll do it. And there are seriously, you know, 5 or 7 or 8 poems in here that I don't think ever got published anywhere. I think at least that I should count them sometime. But when it was done, it was okay. So I get this back and I send it to the editor and he says, okay, I'll do it. So then my experience was, I thought, I'm not too excited about this. I mean, because for one thing, there's only 11 or 12 new poems. And you know how we both are about new work, you know, that's our main thing that we care about, right?
That's right.
So we have this thing of like, when we're at Pacific, we'll always read something new.
Yeah.
You know, take a chance. share that experience with the students, because their stuff is always new. And so I'm thinking I'm going to get this book, and I'm not going to like it that much, but I'm going to do it. I'm glad I'm doing it. Okay, it's okay, but it's not like a new book where you're really juiced up.
Right.
But then I get it, and I ran that, and I'm laying in bed reading it, and the night that they came, and it looks so good, right? It looks
It's a good
hella
looking
cool,
book. It's a good looking book. Yeah.
And I chose this photograph off of this thing on that you can have access to, and
Right.
and it doesn't cost anything. It's called Pixels, but I asked him, make sure the guy gets his credit, and his name is Giuseppe Russo. Anyway, that took the picture, so he gets a credit.
Yeah.
But it looked good, and then I read through it, and it reads pretty good.
It reads really well.
And then I'm going like, these poems are okay. And I was looking at it the other night, and I thought, it isn't very big, but so my end up result of it is, and it's selling out good. It's selling like it's going, people are buying it.
Yeah.
So, but also I was in a thing which I've shared with you a little bit about, when my son had a stroke, and after he had that, I couldn't write anything for a long time. I just couldn't write anything. I couldn't write anything. And I was just so distracted by it. It was such a shock, kind of, that I kept forgetting things. And finally, Sharon Olds came to visit and stopped off to see us on a visit out here somewhere. And we had lunch together, and she told me later, I was supposed to bring this book from home and drop it off with her and Annie. And while I was on the way into the city, taking my son into the city to see one of his doctors, and I go home, I pick up my son, I forget all about the book. And the next thing I remember, and I'm on the bridge driving across the bay to go to take him to the doctor. And I go, fuck, I'm supposed to bring that book. And Sharon that night, she said things. She said, you should make a poem out of all the stuff you're forgetting. It worked. It worked. I started thinking of all this stuff I've forgotten and everything, and it just, it went good. It was, it was an actual poem, and I'd written one again, and so I was going on, but it seemed like everything that had gone before, like I was maybe done. Then I looked at this book, and I go like, no, these poems are okay. And I'm glad I have them in one thing. It's like, I'm glad I have them in one thing. It's like it's like a later version of these African poets.
They
have their work in one place.
But there's a coherence there. It's a beautifully organized. I was very curious about that, and I really appreciate what you say about bringing in somebody else to do it. When I did the last selected that I did, I asked Matthew Shinoda to put it together, because it's sometimes just overwhelming to sort of do it yourself, but it's also cool to get somebody else's sort of perspective on your work. There's a poem that I wanted you to read, and I still think you should, because it's a title poem for the collection. And I really love you to read that. There are a couple of poems that I thought I would love to hear you read. One from the new work, which I just think there's some really amazing work there. But I love this title poem because, in a sense, it's everything. It's a wonderful homage to Annie. I think it's Annie, right? To Dorian, but it's also. It's an ars poetica. It's in a sense, it sets a kind of poetics that is really at the heart of what I think you're doing, or what this collection looks like. you know, because there's this great line in the Muse, in that poem Muse, right? And I like to tease you, you know, you're doing this thing about the Muse, and this Muse is like this underwater creature, this mermaid that emerges. But how that there's a great moment at that poem where it ends. I'm going to find it here. But she is not thinking of beauty or death, only the wet shoes and denim, the beer cans collected and desert stars shining like salvage metal, and the big fish released, sinking back to the bottom to feed on the muddy stems, its strange flat head and narrow lips, its naked electric blue skin. Because that is you, that is your palette, right? The beer can and the magic of nature and so on. Anyway, I want you to read that title poem. Yeah, could you do that? That would be great,
Sure.
Joe.
I'll read it. I'll read it. It's kind. Yeah, I wasn't sure. You know, I got this. I was reading. Naruto is somebody that always makes me feel like he's inviting me up on the stage to write a poem with him. I don't know how to, you know, like he's like, you come up too. Some poets are like,
Yeah,
you know, Yeats, you know, like you're like, Yeats is like, there's no way you could ever do this shit.
yeah.
But Neruda's more like, you know,
You can do
come
this
up
too.
here,
Yeah, come on.
you know.
That's right.
And I had been reading a translation. I think it was a William O. Daly translation. Not sure who the translator, but it was of the captain's verses.
Yeah.
And I got going on the beginning of that. And he says, you can come to me this way and that way. And then I started relating it to how when people get together in a relationship when they're older and they both have a past,
Mm-hmm.
and it's you have a lot more history to kind of mesh together. So it's for Annie, my wife. You can come to me in the evening with the fingers of former lovers fasten in your hair and their ghost lips opening over your body. They can be philosophers or musicians in long coats and colored shoes, and they can be smarter than I am, whispering to each other when they look at us. You can come walking toward my window after dusk when I can't see past the lamplight and the glass, when the chipped plates rattle on the counter and the cinders dance on the cross ties under the wheels of southbound freights. Bring children if you want, and the long wounds of sisters branching away behind you toward the sea. Bring your mother's tense, distracted face and the shoulders of plane mechanics slumped in the Naugahyde booths of the airport diner, waiting for you to bring their eggs. I'll bring all the bottles of gin I drank by myself and my cracked mouth open part way as I slept in the back of my blue Impala, dreaming of spiders. I won't forget the lines running deep in the cheeks of the Polish landlady who wouldn't let the cops upstairs, the missing ring finger of the machinist from Spenard, whose money I stole after he passed out to go downtown in a cab and look for whores, or the trembling lower jaw of my son watching me back my motorcycle from his mother's driveway one last time, the ribbons and cone-shaped birthday hats scattered on the lawn, the rain coming down like broken glass. We'll go out under the stars and sit together on the ground, and there will be enough to eat for everybody. They can sleep on my couches and rug, and the next day I'll go to work, stepping easily across the scaffolding, feeding the cable gently into the new pipes on the roof, and dreaming like St. Francis of the still dark rocks that disappear under the morning tide, only to climb back into the light, sea-rimed, salt-blotched, their patched webs of algae blazing with flies in the sun.
It's good stuff, Joe.
Thank you, brother.
Beautiful stuff.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
You
Marvin,
know,
yeah.
it echoes all kinds of stuff, you know. So you do that. So there's this idea of, I've been meditating on this idea of poetry as the antidote to regret. You know, there's an interesting poem by a woman, I could forget her name, Keating, and she says the antidote to regret is not forget. She kind of then suggests it's poetry, because poetry makes us remember, but how we remember is the transformative thing. It's a kind of healing, even if it's painful, even if it's difficult. But the art of remembering is like at the heart of what you do. So that poem begins in that sort of that uppercase romantic cadence of, you know, or even the Eliot-esque kind of "come, let's go out, you and I," right? And then we will, but then it's a beautiful love poem, right? It's great. It's just beautiful stuff, Joe. And I'm conscious that there will be people with some questions, but there's another poem that it's a difficult poem, I think, but it's one of the poems in the news section. I think it is. It's the poem, I wrote the title down. It's in the news section. I think it's called Some Days, right?
Oh yeah, for my brother.
For your brother. And I want you to read that, Joe. I want you to read that, and I'm going to ask you a little naughty in the sense of provocative question, because it's that great ending for that poem at last stanza. And after you read it, then I'll probably ask you the question about the way that it ends. It's a great image in the end. That references Jesus saying, "In my Father's house there are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would not have told you. I go to prepare a place, blah 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 blah." But I just think the way that you bring that through is just like.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much. You know, I'm always a little shy to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you know, I know you are too.
Yeah.
But my brother, you know, he passed away. It'll be 2 years this Christmas. So this was written about a year and a half ago or something. Some days. And I dedicate this collection to him.
Exactly. That's why I think we should do this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some days we sit at the kitchen table, watching the dark liquid meal trickle down the dim plastic tube, poured it into his gut. Some days we walk a good ways up the shore to the Rosie the Riveter Museum, looking out for an egret or night heron. The halyards rattle, wind of November, smoke from the fires in the vineyards and valleys finally swept from the air. Some days, you might say, better than others. The photo someone gave us of E.E. Cummings, light fedora pushed back from his face, looking down at us like a Mediterranean prince. And how do you like your blue-eyed boy? My brother's ribs showing under his skin, crisscrossed with veins and capillaries, his small ankles motley and swollen, a strange authority in his expression now, unaffected by the tumor in his cheek. He tells me to stop rubbing his feet, to just sit still and talk to him. So I tell him about the impeachment hearings while the refrigerator hums and he drowses in his blue chair. Sometimes his eyes flutter open as though one of the mansions in the Father's house has come down close through the night and he can peer into its windows.
Yeah. It's good. Beautiful poem.
Thank you, man. Thank you very
Beautiful
much.
poem. Beautiful poem. Yeah.
You know, I well, I was glad I got to write a couple poems for him. He's,
Yeah.
you know, been amused. You know how it is. Sometimes you have something in your life and it means a lot to you, and you hope you can write a poem about
Write a
it. but
poem
you might
about
not
it.
be-
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you want to write a poem about it, but you can't.
But you can't. It just doesn't come. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, or you get something, but it won't cross quite over into art. You know, you can't quite.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're always like right on the edge of that, I think.
Always on the edge of that. Always on the edge of that, which is okay. That's what it is about. But when you get an image like that at the end, Joe, you know you got something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know you got something.
Yeah. Remember we talked that part about that movie Crazy Heart, watching Jeff Bridges go into the
That's right.
hotel where it was all dark,
Yeah.
and making that song on his guitar,
On his guitar, yeah.
you know, and hanging on to a
You know, on that
guitar
bed,
like a piece of wreckage, keeping him
piece of-
afloat.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was where it kept from the movies. You know, you
That's
can get it
right.
from anywhere.
You can get it from anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Scott, maybe there's some questions that people are asking or anything like that. We'd be happy to do that. We've got maybe about 11 minutes or 12 minutes.
That's right, Kwame. I was waiting for you to ask the question, the one that you.
Oh
said.
no, I was going to trouble Joe, but I thought we'll leave it alone. But it's I love it's a faith question, and I'm sure Joe can talk about it. But when I heard the poem, I realized he's answered it in the poem, right? The poem does it, right?
Yeah.
That great image that sometimes to see the lowered windows of the mansions, that's just so good.
Yeah.
That's just a great way to think about the unknown of death, the unknown, but the hope of faith and its complexity. The promise and the fact that the promise is one that we don't see until we won't know until we know. It's great. It's all there. It's all there in that moment.
And Kwame, what you're saying about it's not there until it's there is actually one of the questions here from Mary Helen. Do you know, Joe, that the mansion would be in the poem when you started writing it? Did you know it was there before it was there?
No. No, my brother and I used to talk about that kind of stuff though. But I don't remember ever us talking about that proverb or that particular it's not a proverb, it was a statement.
It was a statement, it was a prophecy.
Yeah. I don't ever remember discussing it with him, that particular thing. We used to talk about how like Edgar Cayce had this book called Dreams and the Life of Prayer. And it had the praying hands on the cover. And both of us were like so taken with the fact that this psychic who could like go into the dream state and tell people what was wrong with them. And they would do the shit that he told them to do, and they get well, and he could remember people's lifetimes and stuff like that. He's talking about Atlantis and shit. That he was still somebody who prayed to God, you know, like so that it wasn't one or the other, it was both things. We were fascinated with that and loved that. And so anyway, I just got that image just came into me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy's wondering how many pages Dark Harvest would have been if you hadn't made it lean and mean. So how many poems did you really cut out? Did you have to cut out?
Oh, a lot. I mean, I took out a lot, you know, because McGriff got the idea right away. He said, oh, no, he just wants to make sure people keep buying Blue Rust and Overtime, and that they keep buying those. And if you put everything good in there, maybe it would have been 150, maybe it would have been 160. I don't know. Annie's, I think my wife's New and Selected, which is a fabulous book.
Fabulous book. Just,
170, and she has a whole extra book than me. She had 5 books.
mhm.
I only had 4. I mean, you know, she's pretty much ahead of me I'm ahead of her in years on the planet, but she's pretty much ahead of me in the poetry world, as we know.
Hey, Joe, Roni asks, many of your poems have stars. In instance, the streetlights fractured reflections like stars whose names I've forgotten. She was reminded of the mystics. How do the celestial bodies enter your artistic process?
You know, that's just like a thing. I don't know. I just got that. You know what? I just got that. You know, the stars. I don't. You know what? I can't. I don't have an explanation except to say I look up at them a lot. I'm not really tuned in as astrologically, but I am somewhat. Like I know if it's a full moon coming, I know if it's a big eclipse. We just had a big eclipse. We had 2 eclipses in the last month. We had a partial lunar eclipse at night of a full moon, and then we had an eclipse of the new moon. And they say when you have an eclipse, it's supposed to be the end of something and the beginning of something. You know, so like stuff like that. I keep a little bit of an ear open to it, but
You're always very conscious in the work. I mean, one of my notes and the questions I was going to talk about is about how the physical world around you really does, you know, it's hard to read through a poem of yours that it's not located in space, it's not conscious of space. And you've lived in multiple places. You've been to interesting spaces and sort of worked in spaces, working on boats, or you know, working as a phone repair person. There's a way in which that tactile, physical sense of the space, and yet what poetry opens out for you is the ability to I would simply say to record the awe of all of it. Like it's there, and the awe about it. And poetry gives you the chance, has given us the gift of you being able to record, because I'm sure if you weren't writing poetry, you'd still see it, like, and be going, damn, that's cool. But in the poems, we get to see that thing. And I think all of that is part of it. I think that sense of the world, the physical world, the natural world, it comes through really beautifully and clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And I do have this, you know, we've talked about that, you know, where you have enough awe that you don't know if you can say it or not. You want to say it, but you don't know if you can say it
well enough to match it.
Yeah. So, you know, it's that thing about you're up against what can be said, or, you know, all of us are like that. I think all of us are like that. And a lot of human beings, I mean, we're very blessed that we get to make poems.
Yeah.
You know, or any kind of art, that we get to respond to the world like that. Because a lot of people they have the same feelings and everything like that, but it doesn't occur to them to try to express it out. We get to do that. And it's a great privilege. That poet Jack Gilbert told me that one time. He said it's a great privilege to be able to speak what's in your heart. Yeah, and so many times we fail.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's the idea that I think most of the time, if we are honest, we fail. Language fails, right? Language will always fail.
Yeah.
But as Eliot says, it's the trying, right? The rest is, you know, the rest is none of our business. The best we can do is just keep trying.
Yeah.
But we can work on the language part, right? We can keep working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's bigger than us. The whole thing is bigger than us. Yeah.
It's bigger than us. Yeah.
It's what I love about Seaside. We go up there and we're by the ocean. We're walking along where these little vertical figures walking along, but a huge sea. It's just a great reminder, metaphor of how it is to try to put something on the blank page and spreads out forever. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll try to do two more questions rapid fire, and then we'll call it a night. Karen's Louis in the chat's wondering, how is it that you can look back on your old poems and be in love with them enough to put them out in the world again? Or are there really only a few that rate that kind of forever attachment?
Yeah, not that many. Not that many, but that was the surprise of this book when I got them all in one book, and I was laying there next to my wife reading that book, and she's watching fucking Stephen Colbert, and I'm reading that book, and I'm going, this book is, I wrote this.
Yeah, not bad. They're holding up.
This feeling of like, yeah, and I don't know how I got the nerve to do it. I just wanted to do it, but I'm glad, it's okay, so that's a good question.
Yeah, but there's no need for a kind of, I think you've put in the work. I mean, those books are not casually put together. You put in the work, and we can know of our failures, but we can also recognize, as much as we recognize the failures, we know the moments that work and they come through. And if we don't do that as artists, then what are we about? So yeah. I think there's a self-deprecating kind of thing that we say, well, I'm concerned, but it's also, there's some points where you go, that's a fine poem, and that's okay. Like, that's more honest than anything else. Because once you put in the work, you kind of, you appreciate it. We're not like athletes like Usain Bolt, look at the number, right? That's 9.58. Okay, nobody can argue with that. I've crossed I am the best, I'm the greatest. You can't do that so much with poetry, but there are moments, I don't think Usain Bolt will surround and goes, yeah, well, I don't know how I feel about that race. Like,
yeah.
What I mean. And sometimes with poetry, you hit it, right?
Yeah, sometimes you're just right. You say, hey, that's a base hit.
That's a base hit.
It might not be a home run, but it's
might not be a home run, but that's a base hit. That definitely is a base hit. Yeah. And that's cool. And that's appropriate. Yeah.
The final question for tonight, and I ask this with all gratitude and just recognition of the time and the energy you both spent tonight and all of your work you're doing. Joe, what about Robert Bly? His death recently, how is that resonated in your work at all?
Yeah, I loved old Robert Bly. I loved him. He came to Hopkins when I was a kid studying there at 24, 25 years old. I was 25. And he's the first guy that told me about the Muse. He came in and he talked to all of us, and he said, listen, when you're trying to write a poem, you don't ask your football coach to come help you. And you don't ask your deck boss to come help you. It's some other energy that you ask for. In our case, it's kind of a female energy, and it's a muse energy of protection and creativity and a place of peace where you can make mistakes and you can say anything you want, And I felt like Robert Bly was the first person ever. I never knew anything about Carl Jung or any of that kind of shit when I was starting out, but I knew what that meant. It was like being at my grandmother's house when my brothers weren't there and I was there, and I could just play alone by myself in the afternoon and make up games and do anything I wanted. And it was that energy that helped me to be, and it identified it in a way for me. And Robert Bly was, that was before he was doing all this men's group stuff. I'm talking 1969, 1970. So I think he was very important. We didn't even know who Pablo Neruda was up here. We didn't know who Transtromer was. We didn't know any of these great writers that him and James Wright brought into English. it was all Kenyon Review button down stuff. That's what it was. You know, they didn't go and find him, but they discovered it, or they helped to bring Etheridge Knight out of penitentiary writing poems. You know, they were like, they were like my parents of poetry. That whole generation of 28, you know, Levine, James Wright, Adrian Rich, Levertov, Robert Bly. Bly wasn't as good of a poet as a lot of those people, but he was hella fucking smart, and he was full of feeling, and he said whatever he wanted. Yeah, so I mean, we owe him a lot. I think we owe him a lot as poets in the U.S. We owe a lot to that whole generation. They brought feeling into American poetry, but took it away from Kenyon Review, button down white guys. They brought more feeling, more color, more life, more femininity, more balance. They brought it to us and gave us a template to go from. That's what I think.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Kwame. There's lots of love happening in the chat here. Just, you know, and I think the one that sort of resonates with me right now is just, it feels like we've come home a little bit, and it's a tribute to the both of you and all the hard work that you do to make this program what it is, and what makes us all look forward to these moments. So Joe, congratulations on this amazing collection.
Thank you, boys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kwame, thanks for being with us tonight and asking some great questions and reading so well. And I wish everyone out there a great night. And those of you who are coming out to see us in Seaside in January, look forward to seeing you. And
Come on out. Come on out.
Come on.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
All right. Have a
All right,
great
take
night,
care.
everyone. See you.
All right. Bye.
See you guys. Kwame, thank you, man.
Joe, anytime, man. Anytime. Yeah.
Love you.